bell above the diner door chimed softly as the afternoon light spilled across cracked vinyl booths and chrome-edged tables.
Are you all right?
Outside, rain pressed against the windows like impatient fingers. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried onions hung heavy in the air. At a corner table sat Grace Carter, her hands folded around a chipped mug, knuckles swollen with age. Her coat was thin. Her back was curved. Still, she sat with quiet dignity, eyes drifting toward the door as if expecting someone who was always a little late. The slap came without warning. A sharp sound. Skin against skin. Conversations froze. Grace's head snapped to the side, her mug tipping, coffee spilling across the table and onto her lap. For a moment, she didn't react at all.
Everything's going to be okay.
She just blinked.
I know.
Slowly, like her mind needed time to understand what her body already felt.
What's wrong?
Then the pain arrived.
Breathe.
Before we go any further, I have to ask, where are you listening from right now? Somewhere busy or somewhere quiet like this little diner? Stories have a strange way of traveling farther than we expect. Drop your city below, and let's see how many hearts are here together. The man who hit her was still standing, chest puffed, jaw tight with rage. His name was Derek Hollis, a regular everyone avoided, loud, bitter, always looking for someone smaller to blame his life on. "Don't you look at me like that," he barked, voice cutting through the silence. "People like you think you own the place." Grace's cheek burned. Her ears rang.
Everything's going to be okay.
Slowly, she reached for a napkin and dabbed the coffee from her coat. Her hands trembled,
Are you all right? What's
not
wrong?
from fear, but
breathe.
shock.
Hang on, help is coming.
I'm sorry if I upset you," she said quietly. "I was just waiting for my son." A few customers shifted uncomfortably. A waitress froze behind the counter, eyes wide but feet rooted the floor. No one spoke. No one moved. Derek scoffed. Figures. Always playing the victim. Grace didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just lowered her eyes, the way she'd learned to do decades ago, back when silence was safer than dignity. The waitress finally rushed over. "Sir, you need to leave," she said, voice shaking. Derek laughed. "Or what?"
Everything's
Grace
going to be
slowly
okay.
pushed herself up from the
I
booth.
know, thank you.
Her knees protested, but she stood anyway,
Are you all right?
steadying
What's
herself on the table.
can't breathe.
She met Derek's
Hang on,
eyes,
help is coming.
not with anger, but with something deeper. Tiredness. A lifetime of it. "You didn't have to hit me," she said softly. "I would have moved." That was the moment something shifted. Not in Derek. Not yet, but in the room. A young man at the counter clenched his fists. An older woman near the window whispered, "Oh my God." The silence grew heavier than the slap itself. Grace gathered her purse, fingers fumbling with the strap. Her cheek was already swelling. Still, she offered the waitress a faint smile. "It's okay, dear," she said. "I'll wait outside."
Everything's going to be okay.
As she turned toward the
I know,
door,
thank you.
Derek muttered one last insult under his breath. Low,
all right? What's
cruel,
wrong?
unnecessary.
Breathe.
Grace heard it.
Hang on, help
Her
is
shoulders sagged just slightly, as if that final word weighed more than all the others combined. She pushed the door open and stepped into the rain. Outside, the cold air hit her face, mixing with the sting on her cheek. She stood beneath the awning, rain dripping off the edge, cars hissing past on wet pavement. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened glass. Older, smaller, but unbroken. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over a name. Michael Carter. She didn't want to worry him. He always worried. Ever since his father passed, Michael had carried the world
Everything's
like
gonna
it
be
was his
okay.
responsibility alone.
I know, thank you.
Grace sighed, slipping the phone back into her purse.
Are you all
"I'll
right?
be
What's wrong?
fine,"
I can't
she whispered to
breathe.
herself.
Hang
But the
on, help is
universe had
coming.
other plans. Across the street, an SUV slowed to a stop. Windshield wipers swiped back and forth. Inside, a man in a navy jacket stared at the diner, his jaw tightening as he took in the scene. The spilled coffee visible through glass, the waitress crying and his mother standing alone in the rain, one hand pressed gently to her cheek. Michael Carter opened the car door. If you were standing there watching this happen, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up or frozen like everyone else? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if your heart's already racing, tap like. Sometimes that's the only way to say you care.
Everything's going to be okay.
Michael stepped out into the rain,
I know, thank you.
unaware that this moment, This single cruel act
Are you all right?
was
What's
about to
wrong?
change every life in that diner
Hang
forever.
on, help is coming.
Michael crossed the street without thinking about the rain soaking through his shoes or the cold biting at his knuckles. All he could see was his mother, Grace, standing smaller than the world had any right to make her, her hand trembling as she touched her cheek. The red mark stood out against her dark skin like a cruel signature. "Mom," he said, voice low but urgent. Grace turned. For a split second, her eyes widened, not in fear, but in worry. "Michael, you weren't supposed to be here yet." He reached her in 3 long steps, gently taking her wrist and pulling her hand away from her face. The swelling was worse up close. His
Everything's
jaw
gonna be
tightened,
okay.
a muscle
I
jumping
know,
near his
thank you.
temple. Who did this? Grace tried to smile it
Are you
away.
all right? What's wrong?
She always did.
breathe.
It was just a
Hang on,
misunderstanding, she said softly. "I'm all right." Michael had heard those words before. When kids at school mocked her accent, when a landlord lost her application, when a nurse ignored her pain a second too long. "I'm all right." The lies she told to keep the world calm. "I saw," Michael said quietly, from the car. Grace followed his gaze back toward the diner window. Inside, Derek was still there, laughing now, telling some story with wide gestures as if nothing had happened. The waitress kept her distance, eyes red. No one had made him leave. Grace's shoulders slumped.
Everything's going to be
"Please,"
okay.
she said, almost
I know,
pleading.
thank you.
"Let it go. I don't want trouble." Michael exhaled
all right? What's
slowly
wrong?
through his nose.
can't breathe.
Years of training had
Hang on,
taught him
help is
control, how to breathe through chaos, how to hold still when every instinct screamed to act. He wrapped his jacket around Grace's shoulders, careful, protective. "Let's sit," he said, "just for a minute." They sat on a bench beneath the awning. Rain drummed steadily, filling the silence Grace didn't know how to break. Michael crouched in front of her, eyes level with hers now. "Does it hurt?" he asked. She nodded once. Then quietly, "Not as much as it used to." Those words landed heavier than any punch. Michael swallowed. "You shouldn't have to get used to this." Grace looked at him, really looked.
Everything's going to be okay.
At the broad shoulders
I
he
know,
tried to
thank
make
you.
smaller when he came home. At the careful calm he wore like armor.
You all right? What's
"I
wrong?
raised you to survive," she said,
Hang on, help is
not to fight every battle. Michael gave a sad half smile. "You raised me to protect people who can't protect themselves." Her eyes shimmered just slightly. They sat there, rain blurring the world, until Grace began to talk. Not about the slap, not directly. She talked about the past. About working double shifts when Michael was young. About the day his father didn't come home from work. About learning when to speak and when silence was safer. "I learned early," she said, staring out the street, "that anger costs more than it gives, especially for women like me." Michael listened,
Everything's going to be okay.
hands clenched together
I know,
between his
thank
knees. Every word carved deep in the last.
Are you
Have
all
you
right?
ever
What's
had
wrong?
someone stand by you when the world looked the
Hang
other
on,
way?
help is coming.
If so, write yes in the comments and tell me who they were. Some names deserve to be remembered out loud.
The diner door swung open behind them. Derek stepped out, laughing, phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, told him if he didn't like it, he could. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw them. His grin faded, replaced by annoyance. "Oh, great," he muttered. "Here comes backup." Michael stood.
Not fast.
Not threatening. Just enough to put himself between Derek and his mother. Derek rolled his eyes. "What? You her lawyer or something?" Michael met his gaze. Calm but unflinching. "You
Everything's
assaulted
gonna be
my
okay.
mother." Derek
I know,
snorted.
thank you.
She mouthed off. "People need to learn their
Are
place."
you all right? What's wrong?
Grace reached for Michael's arm. "Please,"
help
she
is
whispered. Michael didn't look away from Derek. "Apologize." The word hung in the damp air. Derek laughed again. Louder this time. "Or what? You gonna cry about it?" Michael took one step forward. Derek instinctively stepped back. Just half a step. But it was enough to notice. "Last chance," Michael said. The diner door creaked as a few customers peeked out, drawn by the tension. Phones appeared. Someone whispered. Derek scoffed, puffing up his chest. "You don't scare me." Michael nodded once, as if accepting that. He reached into his jacket, not
Everything's
suddenly,
gonna be
not
okay.
dramatically, and pulled
I know,
out his wallet.
thank you.
He flipped it open, holding it up at chest height.
Are you all right?
Inside
What's
was a
wrong?
military ID.
Clean.
Hang on, help is
Worn.
coming.
Real.
Derek squinted. So what? Michael's voice was steady. So, you just assaulted a civilian, an elderly woman, in public, and I'm trained to report exactly how this goes next. For the first time, Derek's bravado cracked. Grace gasped softly. Michael. He lowered the wallet, eyes never leaving Derek's face. You should leave, he said.
Now.
The rain seemed to fall louder, the world holding its breath as Derek hesitated, caught between pride and fear, between the man he pretended to be and the consequences suddenly standing right in front of him. And in that fragile pause, everything was about to tip. Derek's eyes flicked from the military ID to Michael's face, then past him to Grace, still seated on the bench, rain misting her hair. The laughter drained from his mouth like air from a punctured tire. You think flashing that scares me? Derek said, though his voice lacked its earlier edge. Michael didn't move closer. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, solid, immovable. It doesn't need to scare you, he replied. It just means you don't get to pretend this didn't happen. A police siren wailed somewhere far off, not close enough to mean anything, yet close enough to feel real. One of the diner customers, a middle-aged man in a gray hoodie, stepped outside. He looked at Grace's cheek, then at Derek.
Thank you.
I saw it, he said. You hit her. Hard.
Right? What's wrong?
Another voice joined in. The waitress.
Help is coming.
I tried to stop him, she said, tears streaking her mascara. She didn't do anything. The silence Derek once controlled was slipping away from him, piece by piece. Grace slowly stood, steadying herself on the bench.
She didn't look at Derek.
She looked at the small crowd now gathering, strangers who had been quiet minutes earlier. It's all right, she said, her voice gentle but firm. I don't want anyone else hurt over me. Michael turned to her, surprised. Mom. She placed a hand on his chest. He felt how fast it was beating beneath her palm. I know who you are, she said softly.
Okay.
I know what you can do.
Thank you.
But this isn't that kind of moment. Derek scoffed weakly.
Are you all right? What's
Hear
wrong?
that?
I can't
Even
breathe.
she knows you're
Hang
overreacting.
on, help is coming.
Grace finally looked at him then. Really looked. Her eyes held no fear, only a deep, aching sadness. No, she said. I know what it costs to carry hate, and I wouldn't wish that on you. The words stunned him more than anger ever could. Michael exhaled slowly. He nodded, stepping back just enough to show restraint, not surrender. You should still apologize, he said. Derek opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. The crowd waited. Whatever, he muttered. I'm sorry, okay? It wasn't sincere, but it was
Everything's gonna be
something.
okay.
Michael turned
I
back
know,
to Grace.
thank you.
Let's go home. They walked to the SUV together.
all right? What's wrong?
As Michael opened the passenger door for her,
Hang on,
Grace
help is
paused.
coming.
She looked back at the diner, at the people watching, at the waitress hugging herself, at the man in the hoodie who gave her a small nod. Thank you, Grace said to them, for seeing me. Inside the car, the heater hummed to life. Grace leaned back, eyes closing as warmth slowly returned to her bones. Michael pulled out into traffic, hands tight on the steering wheel. I didn't tell you, she said quietly, because I didn't want to be a burden. Michael swallowed hard. You're not a burden. You're my reason. The road stretched ahead, slick and shining under streetlights. Neither spoke
Everything's
for a
gonna be
while.
okay.
Now it's your
I know,
turn.
thank you.
Think of one small act of kindness you've done recently, something
all right?
quiet,
What's wrong?
something real.
Breathe.
Share it in the
Hang on,
comments
help
so
is coming.
others remember that good still happens every day. Your words might be exactly what someone needs tonight. They arrived at Grace's small house just as dusk settled in. Michael helped her inside, setting her gently on the couch. He fetched an ice pack, pressing it softly to her cheek. She winced, then smiled. Still my little boy, she teased. He smiled back, but his eyes were distant. Later that night, after Grace fell asleep, Michael stood alone in the kitchen, staring at his reflection in the dark window. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Saw what happened. You handled it well. But Derek filed a complaint, claims you threatened him. Michael closed his eyes. The past he thought he'd left behind was knocking again, this time wearing civilian clothes and paperwork. Outside, rain began to fall once more, tapping against the roof like a warning. And somewhere across town, Derek sat nursing his wounded pride, already rewriting the story in his head, casting himself as the victim, preparing for a fight he didn't fully understand. The night stretched on, heavy with unanswered questions. And by morning, consequences would arrive, quietly, relentlessly, testing whether dignity alone could withstand a system that didn't always listen. Morning came too quickly. Gray light crept through the thin curtains, settling over Grace's living room like a held breath. Michael had barely slept. He sat at the small kitchen table, elbows resting on his knees, phone in his hand. The message from the unknown number still glowed on the screen, sharp and unforgiving. A complaint. He'd faced worse, far worse. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield with clear lines. This was paperwork, twisted narratives, quiet rooms where power spoke softly and consequences landed hard. Grace shuffled in, wrapped in her robe. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, purple blooming beneath her skin. Michael stood immediately. "You should still be resting," he said. She smiled gently. "I've rested my whole life, Michael." She poured herself tea, hands steady despite the pain. They sat together in silence until Michael finally spoke. "He filed a complaint," he said. "Claims I threatened him." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. Not surprised. Just tired. "Of course he did." Michael leaned forward. "I should have pushed harder. I should have made him leave. I should have." Grace reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You did exactly what you were meant to do," she said. "You stood between harm and the person you love. Don't let the world teach you that was wrong." A knock at the door cut through the room.
Michael's body reacted before his mind. Spine straight, shoulders squared. He opened the door to find two police officers standing on the porch, raincoats damp, expressions unreadable. "Michael Carter?" one asked. "Yes. We need to ask you a few questions regarding an incident last night." Grace stepped forward, lifting her chin. "I was there," she said. "I can tell you exactly what happened." They spoke for nearly an hour. Grace told the truth, every word of it. The officers listened, nodding, taking notes. When they left, nothing felt resolved, just heavier. Later that afternoon, Michael's phone rang again, this time a familiar number. "Michael," the voice said, calm and authoritative. "This is Commander Hayes." Michael straightened instinctively. "Sir, I heard about the incident. Your commanding officer forwarded the report. You did nothing wrong." Michael closed his eyes, relief washing through him. "But," Hayes continued, "this may become public. The diner has security footage. Someone posted a clip online." Michael's stomach dropped. "Of my mother?" "Yes, and of you." By evening, it was everywhere. The video wasn't long, 30 seconds at most. Grainy footage of Derek's raised hand. The slap, Grace's stunned stillness. Then Michael stepping into frame, calm but immovable. Comments flooded in. Outrage, support, rage, praise. Who hits an old woman? That man should be arrested. Protective son or dangerous thug. Then someone dug deeper. That's Michael Carter. Navy SEAL. Decorated. The tone shifted overnight. News outlets called. Social media dissected every frame. Some painted Michael as a hero. Others accused him of intimidation. And through it all, Grace's face, bruised, quiet, dignified, became a symbol she never asked to be. Grace watched the news once. Just once. Then she turned it off. "I didn't want this," she said softly. Michael sat beside her. "I know." She reached for his hand. But maybe someone needed to see it. A letter arrived 2 days later. Derek had been officially charged with assault. Grace exhaled slowly when she read it, not in triumph, but relief. That night, Michael sat alone on the porch, the hum of cicadas filling the dark. He thought about all the times his mother had swallowed injustice, so he could stand taller. All the moments she'd chosen quiet dignity over loud anger. The world finally knew who she was. If that revelation hit your heart, leave a red heart below. Sometimes one small symbol says what words can't. Inside, Grace slept peacefully for the first time since the diner. Outside, Michael stared up at the stars, knowing the hardest part still lay ahead. Not the charges, not the headlines, but what came next. Because justice doesn't end with punishment. It begins with what we choose to do after the truth is revealed. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, a place where voices were meant to stay low and emotions lower. Grace sat on the hard bench beside Michael, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a scarf draped carefully around her neck. The bruise had faded to yellow, but its memory lingered in the way she held herself. Upright, composed, guarded. Derek sat across the room. Without the diner's noise, without the armor of laughter and cruelty, he looked smaller. His shoulders hunched. His leg bounced nervously. Every few seconds, he glanced toward Grace, then quickly away, as if her quiet presence unsettled him more than anger ever could. The judge entered. Everyone stood. As proceedings began, words like assault, misdemeanor, testimony echoed through the room. Clinical and cold. Security footage was played. The slaps sounded louder here, amplified by speakers, ricocheting off the walls. Grace flinched, not at the sound, but at the sudden stillness that followed it. Michael's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He breathed. Control. When it was Grace's turn to speak, she stood slowly. The room leaned in without realizing it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply told the truth. I was tired, she said. I wanted a cup of coffee and to wait for my son. I didn't know anger was waiting for me instead. Derek's lawyer objected at one point, tried to reframe the moment, suggesting provocation, misunderstanding. Grace listened patiently, then answered softly. I have lived long enough to know the difference between misunderstanding and hate. The judge nodded, scribbling notes. When Derek was called to speak, he hesitated. His lawyer whispered urgently, but Derek shook his head. Slowly, he stood. I didn't grow up with much, he began, voice rough. Doesn't excuse what I did. I was angry at my job, at my life, and I took it out on her. He swallowed, looked at Grace for the first time since the diner. I'm sorry. The word hung there, fragile and uncertain. Grace met his eyes. For a moment, no one breathed. The judge cleared his throat and delivered the verdict. Guilty. Community service. Mandatory counseling. Anger management. A formal apology required. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, microphones raised like weapons. Michael shielded Grace instinctively, guiding her through the crowd. Mrs. Carter, do you forgive him? Someone shouted. Grace stopped. Michael turned sharply. No more questions. But Grace lifted a hand. She faced the cameras, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. Forgiveness, she said slowly, is not forgetting. It's choosing not to let hate follow you home. Then she walked on. That night, back at her house, Grace sat alone in the living room, lights dim, a single lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. She held a photo in her hands. Michael as a boy, missing 2 teeth, grinning wide. A reminder of who she'd endured everything for. There was a knock at the door. Michael looked up from the kitchen. I'll get it. But Grace stood first. No, I will. She opened the door to find Derek standing there, hands clasped tightly in front of him. No lawyer, no bravado, just a man stripped of excuses. I shouldn't be here, he said quickly. I know that, but I needed to say this without cameras. Grace waited. My mother, Derek continued, voice breaking, she looked like you, worked herself sick. I hated the world for taking her early. I guess I hated anyone who reminded me of what I lost. Silence stretched between them. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I just needed you to know. I see what I did now. Grace studied him, not with judgment, but with a lifetime of understanding pain. Seeing is the first step, she said, but it's not the last. She closed the door gently. Michael watched her, conflicted. You didn't forgive him. Grace shook her head. Not yet. She sat back down, the weight of the day settling into her bones. Forgiveness is work, she said, and I'm still tired. Be honest. Could you forgive after something like this? Type forgive if you think you could, or Never if it would cut too deep. There's no right answer, only honest ones. Later, as Michael helped her prepare for bed, Grace paused at the doorway of her room. "Thank you," she said, "for standing up, not just for me, but for yourself." Michael nodded, emotion tightening his throat. As the lights went out and the house grew quiet, both of them lay awake. Grace with memories, Michael with questions. Justice had spoken. Apologies had been offered. But redemption? That was still unfinished. Weeks passed, but the house didn't return to the quiet it once knew.
Grace noticed it first in the small things, the way neighbors lingered longer at the mailbox, the way strangers smiled a little too kindly at the grocery store. Some recognized her. Some didn't, but all of them seemed gentler, as if the world had softened its edges just a bit. One afternoon, Grace sat at the kitchen table sorting through mail when she paused. A handwritten envelope rested among bills and flyers. No return address. Just her name, written carefully, almost nervously. Inside was a short note. "Mrs. Carter, I don't know you, but I saw the video. My grandmother looks like you. She passed last year, and I never stood up for her when someone spoke to her badly. I wish I had. Thank you for reminding me it's not too late to be better." Grace pressed the paper to her chest, eyes closing. She didn't cry. She breathed. Michael watched her from the doorway. "Another one?" She nodded. People are remembering things they forgot. Michael had returned to base duties, but he came by often, too often, some might say. He fixed a loose step on the porch, replaced a flickering light, listened more than he spoke. He was learning that protection didn't always mean standing in front of danger. Sometimes it meant standing beside healing. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky amber, Grace and Michael sat on the porch together. Cicadas hummed. The air was warm and forgiving. "You know," Grace said thoughtfully, "I used to think surviving was enough." Michael looked at her. "What do you think now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I think surviving was just practice." Across town, Derek scrubbed graffiti off a community center wall as part of his service. Sweat soaked through his shirt. His hands ached. The work was quiet, humbling. For the first time in a long while, no one was afraid of him. No one admired him either. He was just there. A counselor's words echoed in his head. Anger is grief that never learned how to speak. He thought of Grace. Of her eyes, not angry, not triumphant, just tired and honest. At the community center, an elderly woman struggled with a heavy box. Derek hesitated, then stepped forward. "Can I help you with that?" he asked. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. It wasn't redemption, but it was movement. Back at Grace's house, Michael helped set the table for dinner. Grace had invited the waitress from the diner, Lily, over. Lily arrived nervous, clutching a small pie. "I wanted to check on you," she said. "And to say I'm sorry I didn't do more that day." Grace hugged her, without hesitation. "You did enough by caring." They ate together, laughter slowly filling the space where fear once lived. Stories were shared. Pain, too, but it felt lighter when carried together. Later that night, after Lily left, Grace washed dishes while Michael dried. "I don't want to be known as a victim," Grace said suddenly. Michael paused. "You're not." She nodded. "Then promise me something. Anything. When people ask about that day, tell them about what came after." Michael smiled. "I will. If you believe love still wins, even after pain, comment amen below. Let's fill this moment with hope. Someone reading right now might need to see it." The next morning, Grace stood in front of a mirror, fastening a brooch to her coat. She looked older than she once did, but also lighter. She was heading to the community center. Lily had invited her to speak at a small gathering about dignity, about resilience. Michael walked her to the car. "You sure you're ready?" Grace chuckled softly. "I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it." At the center, a modest crowd gathered. Familiar faces. New ones too. Grace stepped to the front, hands steady. "I'm not here because I was hurt," she began. "I'm here because I was heard." She spoke of kindness, not as weakness, but as courage, of standing tall without raising a fist. of choosing what you carry forward. In the back of the room, Derek listened unseen. He didn't approach her. He didn't need to. He just listened. As applause filled the room, Grace felt something settle inside her. Not closure, but peace. That night, she returned home exhausted but full. Michael helped her up the steps. "You did good," he said. "So did you," she replied. The porch light flicked on, bathing them in warm yellow glow. Inside waited quiet, safety, and the promise of tomorrow. But before Grace went inside, she paused, looking out at the street where the world kept moving, messy, imperfect, still full of chances. And she smiled, because the story wasn't about the slap anymore. It was about what rose after it. The days that followed unfolded more quietly, the way healing often does, without announcements, without applause. Grace settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began with sunlight and tea, afternoons with phone calls from women she'd met at the community center.
Some wanted advice. Some just wanted to talk.
Grace listened to all of them. Listening, she'd learned, was its own kind of medicine. Michael returned to base for a longer stretch of duty. Before he left, he stood in the doorway of Grace's house, duffel bag at his feet, hesitation written across his face. "You don't have to worry," Grace said, reading him easily. "I'm not alone anymore." Michael nodded, though the instinct to protect tugged hard at his chest. He hugged her, longer than usual. "I'll call every night." She smiled. "I know." When he drove away, Grace stood on the porch until the car disappeared, then turned back inside, not with loneliness, but pride. At the community center, Grace's presence became something people relied on. She didn't give speeches every time. Sometimes she just poured coffee. Sometimes she sat beside someone and let silence do the work. Words spread, not about the incident, but about her. "She makes you feel like you matter," one woman said. That reputation reached Derek sooner than he expected. His counseling sessions were harder than the physical labor. Talking stripped him raw. The counselor didn't let him hide behind excuses, didn't let him blame the world. "You want to change?" she asked him one afternoon. "Then do something different when it's uncomfortable." That night, Derek stood outside the community center long after it closed, staring at the door. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, absolution maybe, or punishment. Grace noticed him through the window. She didn't flinch. She didn't rise. She finished her conversation, stacked chairs, and only then walked outside. "You don't need to keep coming here," she said gently. Derek nodded. "I know. I just needed to thank you." Grace waited. "You didn't excuse me," he continued. "But you didn't destroy me either. No one's ever done that." Grace considered him for a long moment. "Destruction is easy," she said. "Change is the hard part." He swallowed. "I'm trying." "I can see that," she replied. She turned to leave, then paused. "Keep trying." That was all. Michael returned weeks later. Grace looked healthier, lighter. The house felt warmer somehow, as if it remembered laughter again. "I missed you," he admitted as they cooked dinner together. "I know," she said, "but I also knew you'd come back." Over the meal, Michael told her about his unit, about training, about the quiet pride he felt when he spoke her name. Grace listened, heart full. Later, as they sat together watching the evening news, a short segment aired about a local community center seeing record volunteer turnout. Grace smiled softly. "Looks like kindness went viral." Michael chuckled. "About time." As night settled in, Grace grew tired. Michael helped her to her room. At the doorway, she paused. "You know," she said, "I used to think the world only noticed pain." Michael met her eyes. "What do you think now?" "I think it notices courage when someone is brave enough to stay kind." She closed the door gently, leaving Michael alone in the hallway. He stood there for a long moment, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. The slap, the rage, the restraint, the long road after. He understood now that strength wasn't measured by force, but by what you refused to let break you. Outside, the street was calm. Ordinary. And that, somehow, felt extraordinary. Because ordinary days were built by people who chose better after everything went wrong. And tomorrow would be another one of those days. The morning air carried a softness that felt earned. Grace stood in her small backyard, sunlight warming her shoulders as she watered the roses she'd planted years ago and nearly given up on. New buds had opened overnight, deep red, stubborn, alive. She smiled at them, as if they understood something the world often forgot. Michael watched from the kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hands. In a few hours, he would leave again, another assignment, another stretch of distance. This time felt different. Not heavier, quieter, like a chapter closing without slamming shut. "Mom," he called gently. Grace turned. "I'm coming." She stepped inside, wiping her hands on a cloth, and sat across from him at the table where so many hard conversations had unfolded. For a moment, neither spoke. "You changed a lot of lives," Michael said finally. Grace shook her head.
No.
"I lived mine out loud. That's all." He smiled. That was enough. There was a knock at the door. Michael opened it to find Lily standing there, holding a small framed photo. "I thought you should have this," she said, handing it to Grace. It was a still from the diner security footage, but not the slap. It was the moment after. Grace seated, head held high. Pain visible. Dignity louder. "I asked the manager for it," Lily said. "I wanted you to see what we saw." Grace stared at the image for a long time. Then she nodded. "Thank you." Lily hesitated. "I quit that diner. I start at the community center next week." Grace reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you." After Lily left, Grace placed the photo on the mantel, not as a reminder of pain, but of resilience. Later that afternoon, Michael loaded his bag into the car. Grace stood beside him, hands folded, eyes calm. "You don't have to worry," she said again. "I know," he replied, "but I still will." She smiled. "That's love." They hugged. When he pulled away, Grace rested her hands on his arms, grounding him. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Wherever you go, be the kind of man who protects without becoming hard." Michael nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I learned that from you." As his car disappeared down the street, Grace didn't linger this time. She went back inside, to the quiet she'd reclaimed. That evening, Grace sat at her desk and wrote letters, short ones. To women she'd met. To Lily. To herself. The last letter she folded carefully and placed in a drawer. It read, "I stayed kind. And that mattered. If this story moved you, even quietly, don't scroll past it. Tap like, not for spectacle, but for the soul who carried pain without letting it poison her." One simple click can be your way of saying, "I saw you. I felt you." The night grew still. Somewhere across town, Derek finished another long day of work. He passed a diner on his way home and slowed, then kept walking. Change didn't need witnesses anymore. Grace turned off the lamp and lay down, the house breathing softly around her. She thought of the slap less now. Thought more about what followed, about how pain can either echo or end. She chose the ending, and in that quiet choice, the world felt just a little more human.